I'll remind the committee that we heard some testimony, remember whether it was earlier this week, but certainly last week on the Wood Products Manufacturers Report. We've heard from the LURB and from the Forest Products Association, and then we heard from Forest Parks and Recreation. And we've asked a couple other people who were part of the stakeholder group or part of the process anyway in getting this report put together. And Sam Lincoln has joined us today. He was, I think, right, Sam, one of those people. And then next week, we're going to hear from the Natural Resources, I'm sorry, from the Natural Resources Council. And at that point, I'm hoping that we can begin putting some language together for a committee bill. So, Sam, welcome back. I don't think we've seen you this calendar year anyway. So nice to see you again.
Thank you. Likewise. Appreciate being invited into the committee to testify on this issue. For the record, my name is Sam Lincoln. I operate a master logger certified logging company in Randolph Center and been involved in the logging business since 1998. My family owns and manages farm and forest land in Orange County and operates related excavation and firewood businesses. I served as Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation during Governor Scott's first 2 terms, and I currently sit on the board of the Professional Logging Contractors of the Northeast. I share that background because I've seen Vermont's land use and environmental permitting systems from both sides, inside government and in a day-to-day on the ground with businesses that depend on them. The core issue that I want to highlight today is this: the unpredictability of Act 250 permitting and permit conditions, not necessarily the environmental standards themselves, is a significant deterrent to investment in Vermont's wood products manufacturing sector. This isn't a new concern. Nearly a decade ago, the Scott administration interviewed wood products manufacturers, both those still operating and some that had shut down, to understand what was holding back expansion and modernization. The consistent message then and now is that the uncertain timelines, the unclear outcomes, and overlapping reviews under Act 250 discourage investment and make it difficult for Vermont businesses to compete regionally and globally. Forestry operations and wood products manufacturers are a sister industry to agriculture and Vermont's working lands economy. Tapping a tree, hauling the sap, and adding value to it in a sugar house in Vermont are Act 250 or activities that are exempt from Act 250. Harvesting the very same tree and processing it into a forest product in a facility in Vermont can trigger Act 250 permitting, which is a massive contrast to an exempted alternate use of the exact same resource. Given the loss of capacity to process forest products in Vermont, many landowners, loggers, and truckers rely at some level on out-of-state facilities to add value to a resource that's sustainably managed here in our state. What would Vermonters say if changes to a regulatory program would result in trucking sap clear to Maine, New York, or Quebec to have value added to it? It seems like a far-fetched scheme, but that's an absolute reality for the forest economy and businesses in Vermont. Vermonters grow great forest products and we consume forest products, but we don't do enough value adding of forest products here. You've heard a lot from various experts and participants, and so I'm going to jump right to some recommendations in the report. And these are the most important for addressing the challenges. And to be clear, all the recommendations would be helpful, but my comments are focused on those that I believe would have the largest positive impact. First, updating Act 250 Rule 19. Modernizing Rule 19 to better align with the existing Agency of Natural Resource permits would reduce duplicative review and improve predictability without compromising environmental protection. Allowing greater flexibility in permit sequencing and clarifying when A&R permits can be dispositive would give wood products manufacturers more confidence to plan and invest. During stakeholder meetings, we heard compelling fact-based input from engineers, permit consultants, and A&R staff showing this can be done thoughtfully and responsibly. There are examples of firewood, wood chip, fuel, mulch producers, and sawmills that took years to permit at a relatively small scale size facility. And all those businesses dedicated time, business earnings, grant money, and other resources as they struggled through this very time-consuming process of obtaining the requisite permits for Act 250. There is an absolute opportunity for positive change here. Second, restoring clarity and exemptions for log and pulp concentration yards. These facilities are not speculative development. They are a critical part of the logistics chain between the forest and the mill. As the winters get warmer and daily trucking windows shrink because of thawing roads or wet roads and log yards, these yards have become even more important to businesses like mine, where we can have much faster truck turnaround to a yard 1 or 2 towns away versus a mill 100 or 150 miles away. Treating them like major development under Act 250 misunderstands how the forest economy functions. Third, supporting proposed updates to Rule 34 that allow administrative amendments for relatively minor project changes. Forest-based businesses need to modernize. They need to upgrade stormwater systems, reduce environmental impacts, and invest in cleaner technology. Minor amendments like these should not trigger full permit amendments. The proposed Rule 34 changes are a practical step that support environmental performance rather than discouraging it. In a related real-world example is efforts to mitigate the impact of emerald ash borer. When I was deputy commissioner and emerald ash borer was discovered in Vermont, we had facilities that, in order to take a log or a piece of pulp or firewood that has been infested or potentially infested with emerald ash borer, the best methods to mitigate that infestation spreading are to debark, chip, burn the outer layer of that wood where the emerald ash borer larvae exist and feed. And we have facilities in Vermont that are restricted in the months of the year, the hours of the day, different things like that they can debark wood, that they can run kilns, that they can run chippers. And we helped one particular business try to expand their hours of operation, and it was just so difficult for them with noise and sound engineers and all kinds of expertise, and it was just too much to get through the process. It was expensive, and they finally abandoned their permit because these changes, this very technical part of Act 250, it was just too hard to get it done, too overwhelming. And there, the forests become vulnerable because you have a really good facility that can't expand the amount of wood that they can process in this very helpful way to mitigate the impact of emerald ash borer. Fourth, extending Act 250 exemptions for forestry, similar to those that exist for farming. Like agriculture, forestry has a successful existing regulatory program through Vermont's acceptable management practices to protect water quality on logging operations, otherwise known as the AMPs. Extending exemptions for forestry operations below 2,500 feet occurring on Act 250 permitted parcels simply recognizes that subjecting routine forest management to Act 250 adds complexity, both for the landowner and state agencies, without any clear or demonstrated environmental benefit. Act 250 permit conditions have the potential to interfere with routine forestry practices, such as the installation of temporary skidder bridges and riparian areas on permitted parcels. These activities are already well regulated under the AMPs and well understood by the regulated community. Requiring permit amendments or prohibiting them outright or adding many conditions to them undermines sustainable forest management and creates confusion about what logging activities are truly exempt, to say nothing of the cost and administrative delays to a highly weather-dependent operation. Logging needs to be a clearly exempted activity. These are under Recommendation 9 and Item J in the report. I'd like to flag a broader concern looking ahead. While the report focuses on streamlining and clarification, other active land use policy changes, including expanded Tier 3 Act 250 jurisdiction and the integration of more prominent conservation areas into regional and town plans, make siting wood products manufacturing in rural Vermont more difficult in the future, not easier. Taken together, these trends risk moving us in the opposite direction of what this committee and many Vermonters are trying to achieve. I do not see anything but a more difficult regulatory climate coming at a time when we need relief. In closing, while Act 250 has played an important role in protecting Vermont's natural character since 1970, it is important to recognize that generations of stewardship by forest owners and workers, supported by a functioning forest economy, have also kept our forests intact and productive. We care about forests, and our work and our investments are a strong demonstration of that commitment. If Vermont is serious about revitalizing its forest economy and building a modern, resilient wood products sector, administrative refinements alone will not be enough. We need predictable permitting and land use policies that recognize wood products manufacturers as partners in conservation, climate goals, and rural vitality, not as traditional commercial development. Thank you for your time and consideration of my comments, and I appreciate the committee's work, and I'd be very happy to answer questions and discuss this, provide any further context.
Great, thank you very much, Sam. Immediate questions, yeah, go ahead.
Just quickly, Sam, are those recommendations, are they going to be posted on our website?
You want to, if you haven't already, Sam, just submit your testimony and we'll.
Yes,
Yeah.
I will submit actually an expanded version of my oral comments with some more detail and references to the report. And I also want to acknowledge that the comments that I was responsible for submitting to the wood products manufacturer report, just due to work time load, and I missed the deadline. So the PLC comments with me as a representative were not included in the report, only due to I didn't get my homework done on time.
It's understandable. And if you want to, if they're different from what you've just shared with us, if you'd like to submit to us what you had intended to submit, feel free to do that.
I will. Thank you.
Happy to have that. It sounds like what just when you were going through your priorities, that there wasn't anything above and beyond what the recommendations were coming out of the review board. Is that right?
I think that yeah, I would say yes, that is correct. I think that there are essentially a reprioritized list compared to if their list is prioritized, I'd say we have a reprioritized list and an expanded set of some of those recommendations, expanding further on them. In particular, as my first point noted, that I think that the permit consultants and engineers brought a lot of expertise in ways that I think many, whether it's the applicants or various advocates, don't understand the technicalities of this, and they live that world of permitting and the regulatory sequencing every day. And there's a lot of opportunity just there. And I think bringing some of those people in and the agents, the Office of Planning and Policy at ANR, along with some of the stakeholders that were on the group, had some good ideas, and they could expand on that in a very informed, what I believe would be in a very informed and helpful way.
You're suggesting that we might be beneficial to our committee to hear from them?
Yes, absolutely.
All right.
I just had one more. Sam, could you go a bit more into Rule 19? I'm sure you know more about it than we do as.
Well, and I think that is just to my previous point. I think that there's a Kirby Mulch is out on Route 2, just out east of St. Johnsbury, and it took them 3 years to get through Act 250 permitting. And lots of times you hear that Act 250 permitting happens, in 30 or 45 days or whatever the time frame is. But someone may have worked for years in the background, which they in these cases do, getting their wetlands, their floodplain, their historic preservation, all those different types of activities that are in the requisite down in all the criteria of Act 250. And I think if and again, I think there's experts that work and live in this world that can talk about it. But if there's a way to make it so that you can you've met a certain standard, you can get your permit, and your permit applications are underway with the agency and with the executive branch, that your project can move forward. That the time spent on that is not going to hold up your project for years. The sawmill 2 miles from me took 3 years to get a relatively small permit for a relatively small facility, and stormwater back and forth designs took a very long time, and they had a working lands $250,000 working lands grant that purchased all the equipment, was all sitting there for years in their yard waiting for the back and forth. And there's lots of room for improvement, but on all sides. But if we could make these permits eligible to move faster in a more streamlined way, I think that would be really helpful.
Thank you.
Sam, you, maybe you can just give us your understanding of what the process would look like for updating any of the rules. So, it looks like you mentioned rule, I'm not sure if you mentioned all three rules, but, rule 19, rule 34 and 16 were all, recommendations coming out of the report. Would it be fair to say that since the Land Use Review Board has made this recommendation, that they're likely to move forward? And that, in fact, that they would be the ones updating the rule?
I believe that the Land Use Review Board is as I reviewed my notes, because it was last summer when we did this, I read through the report again. I believe the Land Use Review Board is tasked or indicated in the report that they would be drafting rules, but I don't speak for them, and I don't want to speculate too far on that. But it is my understanding that they want to take this up and make some of these changes.
We recognize that they're not necessarily preoccupied, but they've got a lot that they're trying to do in a compressed time frame with other things that they're working on. I just want to, for the committee's sake, have reasonable expectations of what we might do, as opposed to what somebody else, whether it's the board, the Land Use Review Board, or somebody else. But I think in this case, it feels like this would be something that they could do. Although statutorily, I guess in theory, we could write legislation that says this rule will be updated this way. Not sure that we want to do that, but that's a possibility, I think, in theory. Go ahead, Representative Lipsky.
First of all, I want to apologize to my committee and our witness, who's a colleague outside of this committee, for me being late. I was testifying in House Environment on active management at 10:25. So, but with that said, Sam, do you know what the difference roles that the LURB board versus LCAR, which is part of the rulemaking within the legislature, or other rulemaking committees within the legislature, whose responsibility, where that responsibility lies?
In terms of the wood product manufacturers' recommendations, is it Representative Lipsky? Okay, so
yes, or other under that umbrella, other recommendations.
Well,
to that.
I could be corrected on this because there are other experts in the room, but I think there's two ways these rules can move forward. Is the Land Use Review Board can generate them under Act 181's authority, if I'm correct, and they would be developed through the traditional rulemaking process and then submitted to LCAR and ICAR. And I believe the General Assembly can also direct rulemaking through legislation as well. So to Chairman Durfee's point, that the body could in fact direct specific rules to be addressed. Does anybody disagree with that?
Don't see anybody clamoring to disagree. I think you captured it. Yeah.
All right.
But thank you for stating it so clearly. It is a question that we've been trying to wrap our heads around in another context as well. But I think we're coming to understand how that might work. And Representative Delson.
Thank you. Sam, the Rule Caucus has proposed legislation to postpone Act 181 by a year or so. How do your groups support support this, or are you opposed to it, or, to give more time for thoughtful rulemaking?
We would be supportive of that. I think there's a number of concerns. The first one is that the public engagement process while I have attended some public meetings, I've been there when there are only 5 people in attendance and maybe more on Zoom. But this is a very significant impact on rural landowners, tens of thousands of rural landowners. So I think anything that can be done to increase the public's engagement and understanding and input of what's going to happen with Act 181 Tier 3 is a well planned, well thought out delay. I think to get into what I've seen so far with Tier 3 and directly related to the forest economy, there is again a march toward protecting more of rural Vermont's ecosystem and keeping land intact, and I agree with that. I think that's a good thing. The concern that I have is that it doesn't account for the human use of the land, and particularly the forest economy, that we have businesses and buildings and shops and firewood yards and log yards and sawmills and mulch yards all constructed in rural areas, and there's no carve out for them. There is no recognition of the value they bring. Again, when I was in the administration, I was aware of a firewood producer in southern Vermont who was denied a local zoning permit to process firewood in a forest conservation zone in his town. And to me, that was an incredible contradiction in if we're going to conserve forests, that means there's a resource being used and harvested and cultivated, and it has to have value added to it. And if firewood processing in a conservation zone isn't allowed under sort of the previous regulatory scheme, and there's no recognition of the value of that in the upcoming regulatory scheme, I would say that rural Vermonters rightfully should have a delay and more of a seat at the table in that. And the road rule and where that's going to be applicable, there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty there from what I've seen in the map so far. What the forest economy needs, and we've at the PLC and our Dana, as you've heard from, is a representative on the Tier 3 stakeholder committee. We've asked for a carve out that rural logging maintenance shops and businesses like ours deserves special treatment the same way that agricultural facilities are treated in Act 250.
Yeah, thank you. You answered one of my questions on the road rule. My perhaps my last question is, so you don't think that a chipping a site for chipping or log firewood process has advantages being in an industrial zone in the middle of a village or city center with the added truck traffic and whatnot? You think they're better off out close to the lands where these things occur?
Well, there's two sides to that, and one of them is that quite often, an industrial park has industrially priced land, and these businesses don't have the profit margins to purchase a large tract of land that it takes to pile raw materials and trucks turn around and things like that. I know that's where society does want industrial activity, but it is very costly and the margins aren't there. I use the example of Randolph, where I live. In 1992, there was a proposed biomass plant to be built here, and the traffic was going to go through the downtown. It was going to be sited just at the edge of town. The local community opposed it, and it was denied here, and it was built in Rygate, Vermont, which is now Rygate Power Station. Flash forward 35 years, and Rygate Power Station is under tremendous pressure to be using waste heat in a way to increase their efficiency. They were relegated out to this rural place where no one cared about the truck traffic or a limited concern of that. And now society has realized, geez, there's a lot of energy in that plant that could be used for something. And if it was only a quarter mile from the hospital and all the injection molding plants in the downtown where it was originally proposed to be built, that would have been a really, really great location for that. And so if we push these types of facilities there's consequences to pushing away. There's benefits to having them somewhere. But I know that I can afford rural land, not downtown industrial park land. I'll give another example. We're trying to we would like to build a maintenance shop and move our firewood operation off the farm, get onto a state road where there's pavement, year-round access. It's really critical for our business. There are, between the local zoning, and others, there are very few places left in Randolph that we can actually do this, where there's land for sale. And just recently, a 5 mile stretch of the second branch of the White River was 2,000 feet wide for 5 miles, was marked as rare, threatened, endangered species habitat, encompassing my entire farm, some land that I own on the farm I grew up on, and half of a parcel of land we were looking at making an offer on to build a shop. So the uncertainty of that and permitting, we don't know where to turn. I don't want to build something in the wrong place, but while all these things are happening without carve outs for our types of rural businesses, it is getting tougher and tougher and tougher just to get a permit to do these things.
Sam,
Where are we going to do it?
Where did that designation come from? What authority?
I believe the Department of Fish and Wildlife. It would either be them or DEC. I don't know. I actually just recently sent a request in to start learning about where it came from, how it became to be, and why again, my entire farm where I live is designated as rare, threatened, endangered species habitat now.
And a state authority, though, it sounds like you think.
Yes, most definitely, or I believe so. It's on this Agency of Natural Resources Atlas. It's a pretty significant area, 1,700 acres.
While we still have you, and I don't know how much time you've got, Tim, but I'm going to turn back to the couple of the recommendations that you've supported. We have talked about, we've heard other testimony about these log and pulp concentration yards that were, I think, safe to say, inadvertently categorized as wood products manufacturing back several years ago when there was a change made to accomplish something else in the statute. Can you just help us understand what those look like when we're driving around the state? We might encounter them, how big they are, what exactly happens there?
So log concentration yards and pulp concentration yards are typically somebody who's already has a forest-based business or rural entrepreneur that will become essentially a satellite yard for a mill, whether it's a mill in Vermont, in another state, in Quebec. They become a local yard that serves several benefits. They are a place where we can truck the wood out of the woods to those yards in a much shorter turnaround time for the trucks. They might go 10 miles instead of 100 or 150 miles. They aggregate. They might have, the opportunity to, we might not have full truckloads of certain species that we're harvesting and grades of logs, and they aggregate from multiple producers and develop full loads of logs that will be shipped to specialty mills. So that brings more opportunity for value to us in the rural areas. They are typically graveled. I don't very often see them paved, but they are just large graveled areas where trucks will come in and offload logs and pulpwood, and it will be stacked up and concentrated. And very often the wood is concentrated there during prime harvesting seasons. You'll see them swell right up with huge piles. And then during mud season, trucks are then dispatched to draw down those piles and refill the mills in the mud season and over the summer. And there's not typically a lot of infrastructure. Sometimes you'll see portable job trailers there for an office. Sometimes they might have platform scales that can weigh in and weigh out trucks. There might be a little office building. There could be other accessory things there, but that's generally how they are. There are 3 within 5 miles of me where I sit today, and they are a window to the broader, even the global economy, for me to be able to market wood off local forest land. They're a conduit for that.
Presumably, the yards that are in existence today, operating today, date back a few years before this change was made, otherwise, or else they've had to get a permit in order to operate. And Act 250.
They do date back a long time, and I'm aware of some that are exempt, that have been deemed exempt, and some, and I think some that have, they may have more accessory activities that are permitted. So that, again, there's some inconsistency there, but I don't want to speculate too much farther without sort of having some case study information.
Okay, thanks. Representative O'Brien?
Oh, I was just gonna say, Sam, if our chair's heading home tonight, south on 89, you can get off at exit 3, right? And if he goes right, he'll see the Sir Sosimo one. If he goes left, he'll see Allards.
If he goes right, he'll see Sir Sosimo, and Allards is now on the left behind McCullough's Quick Stop. And then by the pizza place on Route 14 is now another mill from northern Maine that's accumulating spruce logs there. There's a lot of output of our region's loggers and truckers piled up there in these good weather conditions.
I will be turning right, and I know that yard. So, yeah.
What mill is that from Maine?
Well, it's it's Timber Resource Group, and they have a number of mills that they're the purchasing wing of several mills in Maine. The Stratton Lumber, and I can't remember. It may cross. I believe they cross the border. They have mills in Quebec and Maine, and and to Chair Durfee's question. So oftentimes too were those softwood mills, the spruce and fir, hemlock mills, yards. There are times when those trucks from the mills in Maine or Quebec or northern New Hampshire will drive to the population centers and deliver lumber to your building supply stores. And then they come back through on the back haul in the afternoon. They will stop in at these log yards and pick up logs and deliver them back to the mill at night. And so when you're on the interstates and you're seeing those, they don't look like a traditional log truck. They're a flatbed trailer. Those are hauling lumber south in the morning and logs north in the evening.
Representative Lipsky.
Sam, I think you've done a great job at explaining how the sort of, I'll call them commercial log and pulp yards operate and exist. But I also think this is important for actual private loggers who, because of ground conditions, weather, and markets, often would short haul either forward or with a wheeler, a straight job, move logs where a winter landing might be a mile or so off of a accessible road. They may move them closer. The log job may be on adjacent property or the landowner's property. So when markets open up, particularly for pulpwood, which are vulnerable, and that could not be challenged as an option, even if it's not a commercial log or pulp yard. In my case, I often shuttle loads to my farm. Sometimes I wait 6 months before I can get trip tickets for pulp to go to Ticonderoga or Finch Pine, and formerly ship wood to Maine. So I think for this, most loggers are small independent operators, and they need the option to, even if it's back to your farm in Randolph, and if you had to, you could keep that wood there without being threatened by an ordinance violation, that sort of thing. So it's a slightly broader umbrella that this captures within the industry.
That short-term storage is critical, and I look back at the winter of 2022 into 23, and when it was so wet, I think we had 3 days below zero that entire winter. We dealt with wet conditions, and getting trucks, it would normally be a home run places out across hayfields in a frozen winter like this one to get trucks, and we only had a certain number of hours a day we could truck wood out, and if we didn't have those yards close to us, we would have, I don't really know what we would have done, how we would have managed something, but it was a huge advantage to us to have these yards so close where the trucks could just make very quick round trips to them. So they serve a really big role logistically for us.
Anybody have any other questions about this kind of operation? I don't think we haven't really talked about it too much. It showed up as, you know, recommendation. It seems like low hanging fruit and something that we can, you know, easily.
Important low hanging.
Sorry?
It's important. low-
Yes, yeah. Then Sam, I also wanted to just ask you a little bit more about, it's recommendation 9. We have talked about this. We've heard from in other testimony that other folks are recommending or encouraging us to move ahead with that recommendation as well. I wonder if you can just talk about that a little bit more and maybe give an example. So, and correct me then if I'm wrong, maybe this is the way to start. If you have a parcel where there's forest management happening, somebody comes in and asks for, is looking to set up a wood products manufacturing operation and needs a permit to do that. The concern is that the entire parcel then becomes subject to review.
Well, I can give you a real world example of this, and in my town, there's a larger landowner that had forest land and also had multiple gravel pits. And they had, I believe it was, in this, I'm going to speak in sort of generalities because it's been many years since I read this information, but they had a 150 acre tract, roughly 5 to 10 acre gravel pit, and the entire parcel became subject to Act 250. Their activities with maple production, with a sugaring operation and forest management, there were permit conditions drafted that would change the regulation of the sugaring and the logging. That certain activities would be prohibited, certain activities would require clearance from the Department of Fish and Wildlife before they could proceed. Conditions that are either never or infrequently ever seen in any other type of sugaring or logging operation. So the exemption, treating forest management activities and subsequently logging the same as agriculture, an exempt activity that's already regulated by AMPs and the current use value appraisal management plans. That it's redundant, and I think it looks to add bureaucracy without any demonstrated greater environmental protection. Just more paperwork, more time, more delays, more state staff time focusing on something that somebody has already put a bunch of oversight into. So that's how I see that. It not necessarily a wood product manufacturing business sited on a parcel, but any permitted activity that has a parcel that has management opportunity for management of forest land outside of it.
So in that example, the Act 250 trigger was the gravel pit, not anything to do with wood products manufacturing, but it could have been. Wood products manufacturing would also cause that same trigger.
Yes, this to some extent the Stony Brook designation or however that is acknowledged in the process, that to some extent would limit it. But I think what we want to see is a clear distinction that forest management, timber harvesting are exempt, that these activities are already regulated, they're already done under the AMPs, and that they would not be subject to further review.
Representative Nelson.
Yeah, Sam, did I also hear and understand that if a farm, many farms have woodlots attached to their farm. Matter of fact, that's how they survive low milk price year. If they wanted to put in a small sawmill or any sawmill on their farm, they have to get Act 250 approval now. They can't do that under their, added value of forestry markets.
If they were sawing lumber on the parcel where the trees were harvested, that is, I believe that is exempt from municipal regulation, but I don't, I'm not entirely sure if that is exempt from Act 250. But there are various pieces of value adding of forest products. If I had let's say I had a firewood processor, that if I just set up on a lot in town, a commercial lot in town, and built a building and all that, that would be subject to land use regulation, whether it's local zoning or Act 250. If I do that, move that firewood processor out to the site of the harvest, that is exempt from municipal regulation. But and forestry in itself, logging and forestry purposes are exempt. So I would say that if the operator of that sawmill was using the timber they harvested on their own land, that would be an exempt activity. I will say that I'm not a legal expert. I'm not a district coordinator for Act 250. So there may be other things that I'm not considering. This is not an official opinion, but I believe that processing your own timber is an exempt activity.
So if they put it in an outbuilding out behind the barn, you know, in their woodlot, they brought the trees down off the hill or what have you. We need to find out if that's exempt or if that all of a sudden roped into Act 250.
Yeah, I don't think there's any change. I urge you to get clarification, get some appropriate, accurate clarification from the regulator.
Representative O'Brien.
Sam, have you ever heard of one of these sort of sawmills on a, say, a dairy farm being considered an accessory on-farm business? It seems like it, you know, if the Angels had a farm and then they had a sawmill on it, if there'd be some way to exempt them there.
I like the thinking, and that is a great example of it. Was as a farm that owned a piece of land that came with a sawmill, and then it became a permitted use of the land. You know, it became an Act 250 jurisdictional activity. I think it would be helpful. I think it would be helpful. It is not going to necessarily address the scale at which I think we need better guidelines and better opportunities for the forest economy at scale. I think we have to do things at a much larger scale than that, though. But I don't disagree with the thinking at all.
Thank you.
Representative Burt.
I just was looking at statute on Act 250, and when development is proposed, this is in 6001. On a parcel or tract of land that is devoted to farming activities defined in subdivision 22 section. Only those portions of the parcel or the tract that support the development shall be subject to regulation under this chapter. Goes into a few more details, but if you are a farm and then you have development, which would in this case might include a wood products manufactured, then the board in there is that you don't. That area, it doesn't make everything come under Act 250, just the part that's being developed.
Yeah. And I think that's part
But
of
if
the.
you don't have a farm, you have a chunk of woods, that would qualify. So.
And is that the Stony Brook has always existed sort of in ag world, but not in forest
It's
products
always
world?
existed in ag, and yeah, you mentioned Stony Brook, I think, Sam, and that's come up every time we've had this conversation, and I'm a little bit fuzzy still on whether we're talking about the same thing. So I want
You have to
to
ask. I think you have to ask for the Stony Brook designation, though I'm not entirely sure about that, which I don't understand why it's not automatically applied unless some other thing kicks it out of that.
Yeah, and it seems like clarifying that was discussed in the conversations, but didn't make it in as one of the recommendations explicitly.
Chair Durfee,
Go ahead, Jim.
I'd like the committee to recognize Gwen Zakhoff, who is a lawyer. Maybe she could shed a little light on the Stony Brook.
would you like to?
I can do it really briefly, but,
Thank you.
sure.
Come on up.
Gwen Zackup, the Vermont Forest Products Association. So in order for an applicant to know, and I think the Stony Brook process, you have to ask for it essentially. And that's part of the problem, is that applicants don't necessarily know that they should be like asking for it. The recommendation in the report said that they should give, the process should give them notice that it's an option. But what we've seen, and I think there was an example given by FPR about a mill that had, farming on it as well. They knew to ask for the farming part of it, but they didn't, because the farming was automatic, but the woodlot wasn't. So the ask to get the Stony Brook process to be just automatically part of the process is again creating that parity and that equalization between how a farm and ag land and farm and forestry operations and forest management is sort of treated the same. But I think, and going to the same aspect of treating forestry operations below 2,500 feet the same way as ag and farming, you kind of have to have both. So I think the reason that both of those were included in the report is because the LURB didn't feel comfortable having the Stony Brook process being mandatory. I can't tell you why exactly there was such a resistance to that. That might be something you want to dig a little bit into. But we never really got clear clarification on that. But if you don't have that, you need to have the parity between the two in the recommendation number 9. So if you get, I think you need both of them just to cover all of your bases, but there might be some way to thread the needle to get one to cover all. But I'd rather the LURB come in to discuss those two. But I think the reason there's 2 of them in the report, again, is because Stony Brook, having it not be automatic is why you need that extra protection to have it be statutorily mandated that it's treated the same.
There may be some redundancy.
I think there is overlap there, but I'd probably ask the LURB to speak why there's such a resistancy to making an automatic process, because the VFPA, and I know FPR during the process of submitting comments, we both mentioned in our comments that we think that it should be automatic. And even after the comment period, they still stuck to their guns and said, no, we don't want it to be automatic. We just want it to have them know that it's there. So there's something there that we're not really clear about why there's a resistance. So you might want to get clarity on that.
Okay.
I'm just confused. Is it automatic with farming?
It's written into it's basically what you had read into the record. It's already written into Title 10 under the Act 250 that they essentially get it's not called Stony Brook, obviously, but it's put into statute now, where if you're a farm or ag activity, you automatically have a review where it's only the developed part and it won't include any of the farming part of your parcel.
Yeah, so the underlying request is
Codifying that.
codifying it one way or the other, or maybe both ways.
Yeah.
Before you leave, would anybody have any other questions? Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, and Sam, before we let you go, then, any final thoughts, or anybody having anything else they want to ask Sam? Okay, looks like we're good with questions,
Thank
Sam,
you.
unless you have anything you wanted to close out with.
No, I just want to thank you for the opportunity and for your focus on this, and I'd be very glad to contribute however we can. The PLC will be very interested in engaging as this moves on.
Okay, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Yeah.
Before we shift gears over to another topic, anybody have any questions or thoughts on this? I think, yeah, great.
Seems, I'm always in favor of trying to make the statute better. We see problems potentially where they might happen, to make it clear the intent of the legislature on what we want to see happen. And it's the case of, I know, right, with that firewood and pulp yard is in Kirby. And actually, I have a guy who used to work for me, a young guy that was dating the guy's daughter. And started working for him. And that's just a 3-year process for it's just, you know, it's in the middle of the field. It's not near a
Yeah, it's-
village. Yeah, or the edge of a field, right on Route 2. You know, it seems real straightforward to me. I can't imagine trying to go through a 2 to 3 year project to put in a small concrete pad for a piece of equipment. That from my perspective, that should not. I mean, that we need to find a way to make that better.
Yeah, and go ahead.
I, just briefly, I would like to deeper dive into that quote Stony Brook process and advocate because I feel strongly for the forestry issue or wood products sector. That would be very important to get clarification.
Clarity there. Okay.
Clarity.
Okay, yeah, I think there may be folks in the room who can help us and maybe Ledge Council too, or maybe it's the board. Let's see, maybe review board.
And along those lines, I'm wondering if, you know, if we, you know, are thinking about putting something in a committee bill around this, that is on the radar, and then I don't know, what's, you know, is it putting in a short form? Basically wondering what the best process is to go about that in a timely manner, if it's means a short form bill being submitted by one of us or.
No, we don't need to do that. I think we're all, I mean, it's probably more straightforward if we just do a committee bill. And we you know, have the authority to do that. So up to the crossover date, which is after, you know, the week after town meeting. So I feel like maybe a little more testimony on this issue could be helpful. We do have more testimony scheduled next week, as I mentioned, so perhaps we wait until we've heard that. It's Tuesday or Wednesday. In the meantime, we can be thinking about, and certainly can have conversations outside the committee room just to educate ourselves individually on that, you know, the nuance here between Stony Brook and just verifying in statute. And I have to say, I wonder the same thing that was wondered earlier. Why is there hesitancy to be explicit and say, you know, make it clear to everybody? Seems like it's hiding something that doesn't, yeah. But there may be more to it that I don't understand. So
Can we stretch for?
do we need to stretch? Okay, yeah. Let's pause, go offline. We'll come back in 5 minutes.